Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Last time, we really followed the intense journey of the Spanish Armada.
We did. That relentless chase up the channel, the fireships off Calais causing chaos.
Gravelines, the battle itself, and then that incredibly long, desperate retreat north around Scotland and Ireland. Just grueling.
Absolutely. A true ordeal.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the defeat of the Armada in 1588, well, it felt final maybe, but it was really the end of the beginning, wasn't it? Certainly not the end of the war itself.
Exactly. It was a massive strategic failure for Philip II, no doubt. But that immediate disaster, the scattering of the fleet,
right,
that kind of masked the deeper, the longer-term consequences.
Consequences that would redefine naval power, drain treasuries, and tragically claim thousands more lives in the years that followed.
That's our mission today. For you, the listener, we need to move past those sort of celebratory stories of '88. We're digging into the true cost. The naval revolution, this failure kind of validated the fact the huge Anglo-Spanish War just kept going, the devastating human price paid by sailors on both sides, and how the whole event was immediately twisted by propaganda.
Propaganda that, let's be honest, still shapes how we see it today.
Absolutely. So it's crucial, as you said, to remember '88 was just one flashpoint. It's easy to see it as the end.
But if we zoom out, it's one, albeit massive, engagement in the much larger Anglo-Spanish War, which dragged on until 1604, another 16 years.
And it was all tied up with the Dutch Revolt, the 80 Years' War. That context is absolutely key. It really is everything. The war wasn't just about stopping one invasion fleet. Philip II was trying to crush the Protestant Dutch Republic and, crucially, stop England bankrolling them.
And that English support, funded partly by Drake and others, raiding Spanish treasure ships, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. That was crippling Spanish trade routes. So the Armada was meant to be this decisive blow, force an end to all of that. When it failed, well, the goal didn't change, just the method had to.
And the most immediate practical consequence wasn't the cheering in London, was it? It was actually in the Netherlands.
That's right, where the Duke of Parma's huge invasion army, the ground force the Armada was supposed to ferry across, was just stuck, waiting.
Tens of thousands of soldiers on invasion barges. What did Parma do?
Well, Parma was smart. He knew instantly, without the Armada controlling the sea, invasion was impossible. His first order, probably his most crucial post-Armada decision, was get those soldiers off the barges. Now...
Why so urgent?
Disease. He had, over 60,000 men crammed into barges camps? Disease was already starting to spread in those crowded conditions. His priority shifted instantly from invasion to just keeping his army alive.
That must have saved thousands right there. But he didn't just sit back, did he, with all those troops?
No, he wasn't idle. He held a council of war, and they decided, okay, let's use this army against the Anglo-Dutch garrisons nearby, the ones threatening Spanish supply lines. So they targeted places like Bergen-op-Zoom.
How did that go?
It was, well, another frustration for Spain. The Anglo-Dutch garrison fought them off brilliantly at Bergen in November. Then Parma tried to take the Dutch-held island of Tholen. That failed, too. Miserably.
So more costs piling up even after the Armada's defeat.
Huge costs. The numbers are stark. If you look at the whole period, from the failed invasion preparations through the fighting at Bergen, Parma lost around 10,000 men.
10,000.
10,000. Mostly not even killed in action, but dead from disease, dysentery, typhus. A massive price paid immediately after the Armada failed, just from keeping that army in the field in the Netherlands.
So while England's celebrating, Spain's bleeding resources and men in the Atlantic and the Low Countries.
Precisely. Meanwhile, back in England, Elizabeth's reaction, once the immediate danger seemed over, was, well, typical Elizabeth.
Save money.
Exactly. That defense had cost a fortune, nearly £400,000. An unbelievable sum for the English crown then. So she ordered the army disbanded almost immediately. And, quite notoriously, discharged the navy.
The sailors who just saved the country.
Sent them home, often without their back pay. It was about restoring the treasury, yes, but the human cost was terrible. We'll definitely get more into that later.
And it's right here, isn't it, that we see the English trying to press their advantage. Something often glossed over by the '88 victory narrative.
Oh, yes. Flush with that success, they launched their own massive offensive the very next year, the English Counter-Armada of 1589.
Which, looking back, seems like a huge strategic blunder, especially given the finances.
It was incredibly ambitious and, ultimately a political and financial disaster. Sir Francis Drake and Sir John Norris led it. About 150 ships, maybe 20,000 men, comparable in size to the Spanish Armada itself.
Wow. And the plan. decisive blow to end the war.
That was the idea. 3 main objectives. Very complex, very ambitious.
Okay, let's break them down.
First, the military goal. Destroy the surviving Spanish Atlantic fleet ships that were being repaired in ports like Santander and San Sebastian. Cripple their naval power for good.
Makes sense.
Second, the political gamble. Land near Lisbon, incite a revolt against Philip II. Remember, he was king of Portugal too by then, and put the Portuguese pretender, Dom Antonio, on the throne.
Peel Portugal away from Spain. That's bold. And third,
seize the Azores Islands. Establish a permanent English naval base way out in the Atlantic. Control the sea lanes.
that all sounds incredibly difficult to coordinate, especially the Lisbon part before destroying the fleet. Shouldn't the military objective come first?
That's exactly the problem. That was the core strategic mistake. Drake, in particular, seems to have been lured by the potential riches. They attacked Coruña first, which wasn't the main fleet base, had some success, but got bogged down.
Phase 2 time.
Crucial time. Then they sailed to Lisbon, relying on Dom Antonio's promise that the Portuguese people would rise up the moment they saw English ships.
And did they?
Not a chance. The uprising never happened. The English waited offshore, disease started spreading through their own fleet, and they achieved nothing in Lisbon.
So the result, a total failure.
Catastrophic failure, really. On all 3 counts, none of the objectives met. And the English losses were horrific, mostly from disease again, not combat.
How many men?
Estimates vary, but possibly 11,000 men lost, maybe 40 ships. And crucially, it absolutely wrecked England's finances. That carefully restored treasury, gone. It cost over £100,000 more than defending against the Armada had cost Elizabeth.
So the window to really finish off Spain's navy was lost.
Completely lost. And that financial and human disaster allowed Philip II's naval power to actually revive quite strongly through the 1590s. The war was very, very far from over.
If the Counter-Armada was England's failed counterpunch, Spain quickly showed they weren't down for the count either.
Not at all. Spain adapted. They shifted tactics, focusing more on corsair warfare, privateering, and amphibious raids. They set up a new naval base in Brittany, in France.
Which gave them a perfect launch pad to hit the English coast.
Exactly. And the most notorious example was the raid on Mounts Bay in Cornwall, 1595. Spanish troops landed, raided, and burned Penzance, Newlyn, Mousehole, Paul. Terrorized the coast for 2 days.
A real shock to the English system.
Yeah.
And Philip hadn't given up on invasion entirely, had he?
No way. He sent 3 more armadas against England and Ireland later on. It shows Spain's incredible ability to rebuild.
3 more.
Yep. In 1596 and 1597, he launched huge fleets, maybe 120, 140 ships each. Similar scale to 88.
What might under them?
Storms. Both times, massive storms scattered and wrecked them, which of course just fueled the English belief that God was on their side.
Protestant Wind again?
Right. Then a final smaller armada, about 33 ships, was sent to Ireland in 1601. Landed troops at Kinsale, but they ended up surrendering after a few months.
And the war finally ended. When?
Only with the Treaty of London in 1604, after both Philip II and Elizabeth I were dead, nearly 20 years after it started.
It's just fascinating, isn't it? Despite the absolute disaster of 1588, Spain's belief in their strategy, their ability to project power, it just wasn't broken.
They proved they could rebuild fleets at staggering speed. But the really critical question coming out of 88 was this. Had the whole game changed? Had naval warfare itself undergone a fundamental shift that Spain just hadn't grasped yet? They could replace the hardware, the ships, but could they replace the software, the doctrine? And that's the absolute key takeaway from 1588, I think. Forget the storms for a moment, forget the propaganda about divine intervention. The failure of the Armada fundamentally validated a new way of naval warfare, an English-led approach. It sparked a tactical revolution that would really dictate who ruled the waves for centuries.
We need to understand the 2 opposing ideas here. The Spanish style. It was still very much based on their big Mediterranean victory at Lepanto, wasn't it?
Deeply rooted in it. The idea was fire, maybe one big volley of cannon fire to soften them up, then get close, ram if you can, grapple, lash the ships together, and then send your soldiers across to fight hand to hand.
The ship was basically a floating platform for infantry. Cannons were secondary.
Exactly. Cannons supported the soldiers. But the English approach, it was revolutionary for the time. It was all about maneuverability, speed, staying away from the enemy.
Using the weather gauge.
Right, getting upwind so you could dictate the range and the terms of the fight, and then relying entirely on cannon fire broadsides, firing all the guns on one side to damage or sink the enemy ship from a distance. No boarding if you could help it.
Which completely changes what a warship is for.
Fundamentally. And this leads straight into the famous cannon problem. Spanish guns, especially the heavy ones, were just so slow to reload compared to the English. Why was that?
It wasn't the guns themselves, necessarily.
Not entirely. It was ship design and priorities. Spanish galleons were built to carry lots of soldiers. That meant decks were built closer together vertically to cram more men in.
Lower ceilings, basically.
Lower ceilings, exactly. And the decks were cluttered. Huge amounts of supplies, barrels of food and water, spare ropes, equipment, ammunition boxes, all stored between the cannons.
Making it hard for the gun crews to work.
Extremely hard. They couldn't run the heavy gun carriages in and out easily for reloading. Imagine trying to sponge out, reload, and run out a multi-ton cannon in a cramped, cluttered space with a low ceiling. It was incredibly slow, agonizing work.
And we actually have proof of this slow firing rate, don't we? From the wrecks.
We do. The archaeology is fascinating. Wrecks recovered off Ireland, like from the ship Trinidad Valenciera, showed large amounts of cannonballs still stored, unused, powder charges ready to go, but never fired.
They literally couldn't fire fast enough.
They couldn't sustain the rate of fire needed against an enemy who refused to close in for boarding. That Spanish focus on the one big shattering volley before the soldiers took over, it just didn't work against the English tactics.
Meanwhile, the English had been tinkering with ship design for years, developing what they called the race-built galleon, ships like the Foresight or the Dreadnought. What made them so different?
They were fundamentally different beasts. Lower profile in the water, much sleeker lines, longer keel-to-beam ratio. They were faster, much more maneuverable.
Less top-heavy than the Spanish castles.
Much less. The Spanish ships had these high forecastles and stern castles, great for soldiers to shoot down from, but terrible for stability and sailing performance. The English race-built ships cut those down, and crucially, they were designed from the keel up to be gun platforms. Meaning they could carry more heavy cannons and carry them lower down in the hull. This made the ship more stable, a better gun platform, and allowed for that devastating full broadside firepower. The ship was the weapon.
So the English weren't just building ships, they were designing integrated weapons systems. It really was artillery versus swords in a way.
That's a great way to put it. And this technical edge let the English exploit the core Spanish strategic blunder. Philip's whole plan depended on the Armada meeting Parma's army barges. Close coordination was vital.
But the English ships, standing off and pounding the Armada with cannon fire, prevented that.
Exactly. They couldn't neutralize the English fleet. They couldn't guarantee safe passage across the channel for those slow, vulnerable invasion barges. The English tactics effectively cut the link between the Spanish fleet and army.
Here's where it gets really interesting. You look at the sheer size of the Armada, the resources poured into it, but the technology and the strategy were just outdated for this new kind of naval fight.
That's what the historian Geoffrey Parker argued so forcefully. He called the Elizabethan Navy's main warships the most powerful battle fleet afloat anywhere in the world by 1588. And it wasn't just English pride talking.
That technological gap was decisive, more than the weather.
I think you have to say it was the decisive military factor. If the Spanish couldn't force the English into close-quarters combat, into boarding actions where Spanish soldiery excelled, then the Armada had no real answer to that sustained, damaging, long-range English gunnery.
But hang on, if they were the most powerful battle fleet, why didn't England just sweep Spain from the seas after 88? Why did the war drag on for 16 more years?
Yeah, that's a crucial point. Naval power, even superior naval power, isn't everything. England might have cracked the code for naval design and tactics, but Spain still had an empire.
Resources, manpower, global reach.
Unparalleled depth. They could absorb staggering losses like the Armada and just rebuild. They had the money from the Americas, the manpower, the shipyards, the strategic bases all over. So the English technological leap gave Spain a major strategic headache, a disadvantage, yes. But it didn't instantly wipe out Spain's overall strength or their vast resources.
So England started to conceptually dominate the sea, but didn't have the resources to make it absolute immediately.
Exactly. And the cost of achieving that technological victory, the cost of just fighting the Armada, well, it was immense. And it wasn't paid in the design offices or the shipyards. It was paid by the ordinary sailors shivering on the decks after the cheers died down.
That human cost, which is so often just lost in the noise of the cannons and the celebrations, that's where the real tragedy lies, isn't it?
Yeah, when we talk about the Armada's defeat, the narrative usually jumps from the battle to the shipwrecks in Ireland. But the really horrific human cost for both sides actually unfolded in the weeks and months right after the fighting stopped. And it was driven mainly by, well, disease, starvation, and, frankly, neglect.
Absolutely. Let's start with the English sailors, the supposed victors. They chased the Spanish fleet until about August 12th, when they literally ran out of gunpowder and shot.
So they returned to port, heroes presumably.
You'd think. But almost immediately, as we mentioned, Elizabeth ordered the fleet discharged to save money. These men were sent ashore, often without the wages they were owed.
Penniless, after months at sea, having saved the kingdom. What happened to them?
Disaster struck. They were crowded into unsanitary port towns like Plymouth and Portsmouth. With no money for decent food or lodging, disease just ripped through them. Typhus, they called it, ship fevers, scurvy, dysentery.
How many died? The estimates are shocking. Upwards of 3,000 English sailors died after the victory from disease and malnutrition. These were non-combat losses that likely exceeded the number killed fighting the Armada itself.
That's staggering. We hear so much about the Spanish suffering, but the English sailors were dying miserably in their own home ports.
It was appalling. Take the Bonaventure, one of the Queen's ships. Lost over 200 men out of a crew of 500 to disease after returning. The Elizabeth Jonas, another big warship, reportedly had only one crew member still alive by the time officials finally checked conditions on board.
Just left to die.
They were dying in the streets, in barns, totally reliant on the charity of their officers like Lord Howard, who were horrified. Howard wrote these desperate letters to the government pleading for money to pay and feed his men.
He wrote that it would grieve any man's heart to see them that have served so valiantly die so miserably.
A powerful quote. And that suffering, that absolute scandal, it did eventually lead to some change. It was a direct catalyst for setting up the Chatham Chest in 1590.
What was that?
It was basically one of the very first government-run pension schemes for disabled seamen in England. A small positive legacy, maybe, but born out of just immense suffering and neglect.
Okay, now let's turn to the Spanish side. Their ordeal during their retreat was, if anything, even worse.
Oh, magnitudes worse. The sheer scale is hard to comprehend. Remember, about 122 ships entered the Channel. Maybe 87 struggled back to ports in Spain.
So 44 to 51 ships lost in total. Around a third of the fleet.
At least. But the human toll was far deeper. There was a detailed count done later. About 25,700 men sailed from Coruña. Only around 13,400 returned.
So nearly half the men just vanished.
The death toll minimum estimate is 9,000. Some historians put it closer to 20,000 when you factor in those who died shortly after reaching Spain.
20,000 men, mostly lost during that horrific journey around Scotland and Ireland.
Absolutely. The survivors who did make it back were described as being near death. Ravaged by disease, starvation, and especially thirst, lack of fresh water was a huge killer on those long voyages. Many died in Spanish ports, on hospital ships, right after enduring the journey home.
Even high-ranking commanders.
Yes, men like Vice Admiral Miguel de Oquendo, a Basque veteran, and Juan Martinez Recalde, another experienced commander. Both died from fever and exhaustion shortly after reaching port. Spain didn't even get the chance to properly mourn or learn from some of its key leaders.
But the image that really sticks, the symbol of Spanish suffering, is Ireland, the Armada graveyard. Tell us about that route again and why it was so deadly.
Well, the prevailing westerly winds, plus the need to avoid the English Channel, forced them north around Scotland and then down the west coast of Ireland. This is a coastline they didn't know well, notorious for storms and rocks.
And the ships were already damaged from the fighting.
Badly damaged. Low on food, desperately low on water. And crucially, many had lost their main anchors during the fireship attack off Calais. They had cut their anchor cables in the panic to escape.
Which meant,
when the inevitable autumn storms hit off Ireland, and this was during the Little Ice Age, remember? So storms were often severe. They couldn't anchor safely offshore to ride it out. They were helpless.
driven onto the coast.
Driven onto those jagged rocks. At least 28 ships were confirmed wrecked on the Irish coast. About 5,000 men died there. Drowning, starvation on the beaches, and slaughter.
Slaughter. By whom?
By English soldiers stationed in Ireland. The Lord Deputy, Sir William Fitzwilliam, issued orders to kill any Spanish survivors found. He feared they might join Irish rebels. It was incredibly brutal, ignoring the usual custom of ransoming prisoners of rank.
Just highlights the ruthlessness of the conflict. And those famous wreck there is the Galleass La Girona, isn't it?
La Girona is the epitome of the tragedy. It was a galleass, one of those hybrid oared and sailed warships. Already damaged, it had picked up hundreds of survivors from other wrecks nearby. It was crammed with men, maybe 1,300 people on board.
And then it hit the rocks.
Hit the rocks near Dunluce Castle in County Antrim. It went down with almost everyone. Only 9 men survived out of 1,300. Just unimaginable loss on one vessel.
And we have one incredibly vivid personal account from a survivor of the Irish shipwrecks, don't we? Captain Francisco de Cuellar.
Cuellar's story is just astonishing. It's a primary source that brings the horror to life. His own ship was wrecked. He barely made it ashore. He then had to survive in hostile territory, dodging English patrols, sometimes finding shelter with Irish chieftains, sometimes being robbed by them.
On the run for weeks.
Weeks. He describes being stripped naked, starving, hiding in forests, witnessing horrific scenes. He even survived another shipwreck trying to escape Ireland. Eventually, he managed to get passage on a Scottish ship, made his way through Scotland, then the Low Countries, and finally, somehow, got back to Spain. His account is this raw testament to the sheer individual suffering behind the grand naval strategy.
These stories, the disease, the wrecks, they leave deep scars, don't they? Not just physical ones, but scars on national memory, national identity for both England and Spain.
Absolutely. But the question is, how quickly did the official narratives, the propaganda machines, get to work covering up those scars, polishing them over with national pride and religious explanations? Almost instantly. The way the Armada story was told, especially in England, became a masterclass in state-sponsored spin. And remember, this is an age long before instant news. There was this huge information vacuum across Europe in the weeks after the battle.
Spain tried to fill that vacuum first, didn't they, with fake news?
They did. Spanish agents started spreading reports that the Armada had actually won, that they'd taken the Isle of Wight, that Drake himself had been captured.
Why? What was the point of that?
Money. Pure and simple. Philip II desperately needed Pope Sixtus V to release the huge subsidy he'd promised 1 million gold ducats. But the Pope had cleverly made payment conditional on Spanish troops actually landing in England.
So bad news meant no papal money.
Exactly. No landing, no cash. It was a desperate gamble to buy time and maybe get the money before the truth got out. But it didn't work. Fast ships carried the real news, the scale of the defeat, to ports in France, the Netherlands, Italy, by late August, early September.
And Philip II's reaction when he finally got the official word, the famous quote.
Well, the story goes, he took the news stoically, after maybe shutting himself away for a bit, and he supposedly said, "I sent the Armada against men, not God's winds and waves."
Which is brilliant propaganda in itself, isn't it?
Absolutely brilliant. It neatly shifts the blame away from any human error, flawed strategy, outdated ships, leadership issues onto uncontrollable fate or God's will. It protected the reputation of his commanders and, crucially, his own judgment.
Meanwhile, in England, they went into propaganda overdrive. This became the ultimate David versus Goliath story.
Oh, massively. It fueled English national pride for centuries. It cemented the legend of Elizabeth I as this warrior queen, Gloriana, the defender of the Protestant faith against the Catholic superpower.
And the most iconic piece of that is her speech at Tilbury.
Absolutely. Elizabeth on horseback, wearing a silver cuirass, addressing her troops, that powerful line, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England, too."
But we have to remember the context, right? She gave that speech after the main danger was over. The Armada was already limping north.
Precisely. The battle was won, the fleet was retreating. It was pure political theater, but incredibly effective theater. It created this enduring image of a defiant queen ready to lead her people in battle.
And the core message of the English propaganda.
Religious framing. It hammered home the idea that this wasn't just English skill, it was divine intervention. God himself had intervened to save Protestant England.
Which must have been a huge boost for Protestants everywhere in Europe, fighting against Catholic powers.
Immense boost. The storms that wrecked so many Spanish ships became known, famously, as the Protestant Wind, God's breath scattering the Catholic invaders.
And they minted medals to prove it.
They did. Official victory medals were struck. One had the Latin inscription, 1588, Flavit Jehovah et dissipati sunt, God blew, and they are scattered. Another played on Julius Caesar, venit, vidit, fugit. He came, he saw, he fled. The message couldn't be clearer.
And the propaganda wasn't just words or medals, it was visual too. Very public.
Very public. They made a huge spectacle of the captured Spanish battle standards. 12 of these massive embroidered banners were paraded through London and then hung up in the choir of St. Paul's Cathedral for everyone to see during the big national Thanksgiving service in November.
Tangible proof of victory.
Exactly. And another captured banner from the galleon San Mateo was sent to the Dutch Republic and hung in a church in Leiden, a powerful symbol of shared Protestant victory against the Habsburgs.
While in Spain, what was the narrative? Silence. Blame the weather.
Mostly silence, mourning, and yes, deflection onto the weather, following Philip's lead. The sheer scale of the loss, especially the deaths of so many sons from noble families, many drowned on La Girona, caused widespread, genuine despair. It was very hard to spin that positively.
So you have these narratives hardening almost immediately. The English story of miraculous deliverance, the Spanish story of tragic misfortune. Future generations largely accepted these versions, didn't they?
They did. But if we connect this back to the bigger picture, the war that continued, the Counter-Armada failure, how did this one incredibly mythologized event actually reshape the geopolitical landscape over the next century? Did the myths match the reality?
Well, the Armada defeat immediately became enshrined in sort of British foundational myth, didn't it? Seen as the turning point, the moment England survived invasion and was set on course for maritime greatness, for empire.
It definitely boosted English seafaring confidence, no question, and it fed into the push for colonization later on. Conversely, for Spain, 1588 is often painted as the beginning of the end, start of their long, slow decline as the dominant world power.
Is that fair, though? Attributing the decline of a vast empire to one naval campaign?
It's probably too simplistic, yeah. We have to be careful. Spain's empire remained huge and incredibly wealthy for a long time after 1588. Their silver fleets kept sailing. But the psychological blow was immense. The aura of Spanish invincibility at sea was shattered, and the technological advantage had clearly passed to England, at least in northern European waters.
And militarily, the legacy was crystal clear.
Absolutely unambiguous. It confirmed the death of the old way of naval warfare. No more relying on grappling and boarding as the primary tactic. The future was standoff, heavy gunnery warfare, the kind pioneered by those English race-built ships.
That lesson must have resonated with military planners for centuries.
It did, and it underlined one absolutely crucial lesson for amphibious invasions, a lesson still relevant today. You must secure control of the sea before you try to land troops. Spain failed because their plan required the fleet and the army to link up before naval dominance was achieved. It was a fatal flaw.
And the memory of 88 itself, the story, became this powerful tool in later years.
Hugely powerful. It was deliberately invoked whenever Britain felt threatened by invasion. During the Napoleonic Wars, absolutely. Nelson and his ships were seen as the heirs of Drake.
And even in World War II.
Definitely. During the Battle of Britain, with the threat of German invasion looming, Churchill and the propaganda machine explicitly called the RAF pilots the new Elizabethans, fighting off the continental threat, just like Drake's sailors. The narrative was powerful. Plucky island nation, saved by its skill at sea or in the air, and maybe a little bit of providential help.
It's also fascinating how the telling of the Armada story has changed over time. Historiography, right? How perspective shapes the history we write.
Exactly. The story wasn't static. In the 1590s, right after the event, it was all about God's favor for Protestantism. Simple as that.
Right.
By the 17th century, it becomes more about English nationalism, celebrating English seamanship, and often blaming the Spanish commander, Medina Sidonia, portraying him as incompetent, which wasn't entirely fair.
And the 19th century, the Victorians.
That's when the Whig historians got involved. They brought in more political critique, arguing that Queen Elizabeth herself had been indecisive, that she'd almost lost the war by penny pinching on supplies for the fleet. Sound familiar?
Oh, yes. And then the 20th century.
That's when the focus really shifted to the technical side. Historians started digging into the details of ship design, the differences in cannon technology, reloading speeds, the professionalization of the English Navy. The weather, which used to be the hero of the story, became more of a contributing factor, something that exploited Spain's existing technical weaknesses.
And we also have the actual physical legacy, stuff recovered from the seabed.
Right. The discovery and salvage of the wreck of La Girona off Ireland in 1968 was huge. They brought up gold and silver coins, incredible Renaissance jewelry belonging to nobles on board, cannons, navigational tools.
Where can you see those?
They're on display at the Ulster Museum in Belfast. And they are just stunning, tangible proof of the disaster. It's a stark contrast, isn't it? You have this image of Spanish gold fleets still sailing, immense wealth glowing. But here's the physical proof of this catastrophic loss, this human tragedy. While at the same time, England is building the navy that will eventually challenge Spain for global reach. It really symbolizes that slow, grinding shift in power.
It's just incredible how one event can resonate through history in so many different ways, as myth, as military lesson, as technological watershed.
So what does this all mean? We started with that immediate defeat, the scattered fleet, and we've ended up with this really complex, tangled legacy. The Armada certainly changed the immediate balance of power, but more profoundly, it changed how war was fought at sea. It proved the old ways were obsolete.
It was a military and technological turning point, for sure, but maybe an even bigger propaganda victory for England, cementing that Protestant maritime identity.
I think so. And that technological gap, the gunnery advantage rooted in English innovation, that seems to have been the decisive factor in the actual fighting.
But we have to keep coming back to the Counter-Armada, the English failure, the very next year. It's a crucial reminder that 1588 wasn't the knockout blow it's often portrayed as. Spain wasn't finished.
Not by a long shot. It took decades more of grinding, expensive warfare to really erode Spain's power. Which leads to a final thought, something for you to maybe ponder. Consider this. Philip II had immense resources, centralized control. What if, after the shock of '88, he had recognized the technological writing on the wall? What if Spain had fully committed to matching the English naval strategy, ditched the boarding obsession, gone all in on building faster ships with better long-range gunnery?
Could they have adapted?
It's a huge what if. But if Spain, with its wealth and global reach, had adopted England's naval innovations, would the sun ever have truly set on the Spanish Empire? Maybe the biggest lesson of 1588 wasn't just how England won, but the potential power Spain failed to grasp by not learning quickly enough from its defeat.